You're listening to Informed America Radio, pushing back the frontiers of ignorance 24/7. Now, the Teri O'Brien Show.
May I have your attention, please?
Here we go. Y'all ready?
It's not about being right in the ideological sense of the word. It's about committing common sense every single day. It's politics, it's pop culture, and it's the news of the day, both serious stuff and the water cooler stuff.
I've never seen such a bunch of petty, bitter, mean-spirited, vindictive people. And I'm really glad, Democrats, I'm really glad that all the serious problems in our country are solved now. And we can focus on being vindictive over this guy who's going to be ambassador to Belgium. That's like the most important problem we have facing our country right now. Way to go, Democrats. This is what I'm saying. My work is never done. We don't need to investigate the motive. As sad as this is, when you put on the red suspenders.
Put on the uniform.
Yeah, you put on the big shoes. You put on the white face and the red nose and the red makeup, the wig, that crazy looking wig, and you go out there and flop around with the big shoes. I'm sorry, I don't want to see anybody hurt, but I have to say, you're an intimidating and frightening presence in the community at that point. And some might say that without even knowing it, you're actually asking for it because you are dressed up as a clown. One thing we always say is the Second Amendment is not about hunting. The Second Amendment is about the right to keep and bear arms to prevent the government from becoming tyrannical. That's what it's about. It's not about being able to go out and shoot bunny rabbit.
Ooh, what a girl. She's always in a whirl. Always going new places, seeing new faces. That girl on the go.
Teri O'Brien.
Wonderful girl on the go.
You said many times that the emails were not marked classified. No evidence that that's not true. But the non-disclosure agreement you signed as Secretary of State says that really is not that relevant. It says classified information is marked or unmarked classified, and that all of you are trained to treat all of that sensitively and should know the difference.
Former Clinton, or maybe I should say current Clinton water carrier, George Stephanopoulos, asking a question of presidential candidate Hillary Clinton on this morning's edition of This Week on ABC here on this January 31st, 2016 edition of the Teri O'Brien Show. Welcome one, welcome all. We got a lot to talk about today. Of course, we are going to talk about election 2016. I'm going to let you hear the answer to that question. And also, we're going to talk about Barack Obama, of course, making a historic visit to a landmark in Baltimore. That word historic, right? Anytime you hear that, your antenna should go up. And this case is no exception. Good news for the Denver Broncos. I hope we can get to that. Is the Super Bowl next Sunday? If you are listening, by the way, on a Sunday, if it is Sunday, January 31st, 2016, between 5 and 7 p.m. Eastern, and you are listening live, then that means you can go to the Live and Lively chat room at TeriO'Brien.com, TeriO'Brien.com, and you can weigh in and share your thoughts. Otherwise, if you're listening on demand, which we love, if you're listening on Spreaker, maybe you're listening on the Spreaker app on your device, your smartphone or tablet. When you listen on Spreaker, guys, if you haven't done it before, you download the app and search for Informed America Radio. Search for the network because this program, The Teri O'Brien Show, is the flagship show of the network. But we also have the Machete of Truth show and the Caden Cowger program. And those shows are also, you can hear those on Spreaker. And I think it's great to have these apps on your your smartphone, because you just never have to waste any time listening to things that are going to make your IQ go down, as so much over-the-air stuff will do today. So thanks so much. If you're listening live, I hope to see you in chat. If you're listening on demand, thanks for that as well. Please leave comments on Spreaker, at iTunes. We love iTunes comments as well. Also search for Informed America Radio on iTunes. Let's see. Well, I guess we're going to get right into talking about election 2016, because here's the thing. First of all, the Sunday shows, as usual, as I tell you guys every week, you don't learn very much on the Sunday shows. I do have that Hillary audio because I think it's instructive to hear this woman continue to lie her ass off, and we will hear that. And it's quite a substantial ass to lie off, by the way. Maybe only slightly smaller than the one belonging to the first Klingon, Michelle Antoinette. But the Sunday shows, basically all they are is talking about polls, what the polls say, and then these allegedly smart people who really aren't very smart and not very well informed blather away with their opinions, which really don't add very much to the conversation. So I will tell you on this morning's shows that Donald Trump on This Week did refer to Ted Cruz as a total liar. And the subject of this lying thing is Ted Cruz suggesting that Donald Trump is in favor of Obamacare and or a single-payer healthcare system. And Donald Trump, of course, vehemently denies that, protests up and down, swears up and down that he is not in favor of that. However, I will tell you, I didn't grab the audio, but I made some notes about what he actually said, what Donald Trump has said about healthcare. Now, as we go through the list of the top 3 contenders, and I mentioned that I have issues with all 3 of these. I've mentioned that I've had issues and continue to have issues with all 3 of the top contenders. You tell me what you think. Tell me in the chat room. If you're listening on demand, go to terryobrien.com, comment on the show notes page for this edition of the program. What do you think? Do you have the same issues I do? When we talk about Donald Trump, there are a couple issues. Issue 1 is, of course, the lack of specifics about things like this healthcare thing. When he was confronted with the accusation that he supports Obamacare and or single payer, he went into a rather demagogic rant, I have to say, about how if someone has no money and they're lying in the middle of the street dying, we're not going to just let them die. We're going to help people. We're going to help everyone. That's all he keeps saying. And he says, maybe in addition to being a total liar, Ted Cruz has no heart. And when asked for specifics, he just says, we'll figure it out. But he says we will repeal and replace Obamacare, but he doesn't say with what. But he does, as I say, repeat that we're not going to let people with no money die in the middle of the street. Well, of course, we don't now. And even though we've upended our healthcare system and spent billions of dollars, we're still told that we have 29, 30 million people who are still uninsured. We have all the illegal aliens in the country still going to the emergency room. So I'm not really sure, what he's talking about, people dying in the street. But in any case, that is one serious problem that I have with Donald Trump. And of course, I've said this many times, guys. I think we all owe Donald Trump a debt of gratitude for raising what I believe is the existential issue of this election. Hillary said something today that I have to agree with. She's absolutely correct when she says the stakes couldn't be higher in this upcoming election. She's absolutely right about that. I don't think we can stand another 4 years of liberal Democrat presidents. I mean, we've had this Marxist with his magic pen and phone determined to remake the country, to get payback for its many sins, especially against black and brown people. But I think she's right. And so, Trump has raised the issue of illegal immigration. And we're going to talk about that in context of some of the other candidates, because it's a very important issue. And it's an existential issue. That and the issue that we have talked about time and again, and that's the issue of these refugees, so-called. I call a lot of them economic migrants. I don't think most of them are actually within the definition of refugee. I think they're just people that had the misfortune of being born in a poor country and they would like to escape. And thanks to the UN and a lot of so-called do-gooder organizations that make a fortune, courtesy of the taxpayers, to seed the country with Muslims, there we are. We have these people just flooding our country. So, I mean, those are the existential issues, and Donald Trump did raise that issue. So I think we owe him a debt of gratitude just for that alone. But the issue of the lack of specifics about things like Obamacare. Now, I understand in the context of a political campaign, people put out position papers, people can go and read position papers, but a candidate has to be able to respond to a question like, what are you going to do when you repeal Obamacare, with something other than, if people have no money, we're not going to let them die in the streets. So that's a serious problem that I have. As much as I believe that we owe Donald Trump a debt of gratitude for raising this issue of the illegal immigrants and the lack of border security. And frankly, after the San Bernardino murders, the issue of unvetted Muslim so-called refugees. I think that that's absolutely true as well. But there's another issue with Donald Trump. So that issue was raised earlier this week, or I guess maybe last week, if your week starts on Sunday, which mine kind of does, by Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska. And he launched a barrage against Trump in Trump's favorite little playground, Twitter. And a lot of the things he tweeted were about policy. But as the National Review's David French wrote, and we will, of course, put this article in the show notes so you can read it, Sasse tweeted on January 24th, I guess that was last Sunday, question for real Donald Trump: you brag about many affairs with married women. Have you repented to harm children and spouses? Do you think it matters? So, I mean, does that matter? I think one reason that the mainstream media hasn't raised that issue, I think you can boil that down to two words: Bill Clinton, right? I mean, they certainly don't want to raise the issue of sexual immorality in this campaign, because that would be very damaging to Hillary. And those who say, well, Hillary wasn't the one engaging in the sexual escapades. No, she was the one bullying, intimidating, and threatening the women that Bill got involved with. So I'm not sure that does her any good. So I think that's why we haven't heard about this issue. But we do know that the founders believed that it was extremely important for the person occupying the office of president to be a person of good moral character. And I think many of you believe that, and so do I. Well, here's what Sasse is talking about. As David French is writing here in the National Review, Trump engaged in a highly publicized affair with actress Marla Maples while he was married to his first wife, Ivana Trump, and has written about having relationships with married women. Quote, if I told the real stories of my experiences with women, often seemingly very happily married and important women, this book would be a guaranteed bestseller, Trump wrote in his book, The Art of the Comeback. Trump also wrote in, quote, Think Big and Kick Ass, unquote, I guess that's another book, that he's been with married women, quote, beautiful, famous, successful, married. I've had them all, secretly, the world's biggest names. Now, I mean, is this just puffery, as we would say in the real estate law field? Is this just the entertainer coming out, the guy who wants to sell books? Or is this true? And whether it's true or not, is this the sort of person, is this the type of character, person of this character who thinks it's desirable to brag about extramarital affairs? Is this the sort of person we want to elect? Does that matter? Because I would think if you engaged in adultery, it wouldn't be something to brag about. I would think it'd be something to be very ashamed of. But it certainly doesn't appear that he's ashamed of it at all. Now, what does Jerry Falwell Jr. think of that? He just endorsed him. What does he think of that? What does Sarah Palin think of that? Apparently, these guys don't care. Mr. French here quotes in his National Review piece from the Southern Baptist Convention's 1998 resolution on moral character of public officials. We urge all Americans to embrace and act on the conviction that character does count in public office, and to elect those officials and candidates who, although imperfect, demonstrate consistent honesty, moral purity, and the highest character. And any of you who said at the time that Bill Clinton was president, and we learned about his very immoral behavior, that how can we trust him? You know, if you lie to your wife, which you do if you're committing adultery, if you're having affairs, if you're lying to your spouse, and you are, every minute you're acting like you're a faithful husband or wife and you're having affairs, then how can anyone trust you? Anybody who said that at the time that Bill Clinton was president, how could you turn around and support Trump? And please understand, I haven't endorsed anybody. I have issues with all the top 3 people. Right now, I'm talking about some of the issues I have with Donald Trump. And I think this is a serious issue. And I'd be very interested in hearing from those of you who are supporting him. And I know a lot of you are supporting him vigorously. A lot of people that I respect a lot and whose opinions I respect think he would be a great president because he'll do things, he'll secure the border, he'll help bring back jobs, all of these things. But what about this moral character issue? And what about the lack of specifics? And in National Review, they also have a piece here talking about Trump, talking about his appearance this morning on This Week, where he talked about how people are lying in the streets and they have no money. We're not going to let them die. And I'll elaborate and tell you what else he said about that, because I have criticized him for not being specific. He said, we're going to work with our hospitals. We're going to work with our doctors. We've got to do something. You can't have a small percentage of our economy because they're down and out and have absolutely no protection. So they end up dying from, what you could have a simple procedure, even a pill. You can't do that. We'll work something out. That doesn't mean single payer. And I mean, because he's got no heart. He's referring to Cruz. And if this means I lose an election, that's fine, because frankly, we have to take care of the people in our country. We can't let them die on the sidewalks of New York or the sidewalks of Iowa or anywhere else. Now, one thing you can say, if he's going to secure the border, then it is different, isn't it, if we're going to talk about some sort of government subsidized health care? Because one thing we can't have, obviously, is a welfare state and open borders. That's what we have now. So what do you think of that? So that's an issue I have with, 2 issues actually I have with Donald Trump. So, I mean, there you have that. Now I hesitate to even bring this up because I have gotten in so much trouble. And by trouble, I mean people calling me names, just unjustified mischaracterizations of me and my position when I mention the fact that I do not believe that Senator Ted Cruz, is qualified to be president. I do not believe that he is an Article II natural-born citizen. And that's a term of art, natural-born citizen. And I'm very tired of people who support Senator Cruz conflating the issue of citizenship and the term of art in Article 2 of the Constitution, a term used in only one place in our Constitution, and that is Article 2, describing the qualifications for president, natural-born citizen. Ted Cruz's citizenship as an American is not questioned. That's not in play at all. But that's not the same thing as the term of art, natural-born citizen. I, as you guys know, am a member of a state bar. However, when I stopped practicing law, I petitioned the court of my state to allow me to go into what is called inactive status. Now, why do you do that? Well, you do that so that you don't have to pay the very substantial bar fees. Every year, active attorneys have to pay fees to the state bar. If you're not practicing, why should you pay those? Now, I am an active attorney in the sense that I love to work out. I love to work out. I like to be active. But of course, that's not what active means in the context of being a member of the bar. And I'm inactive when it comes to that. Well, that's how natural-born citizen is. It's a term of art that has a specific meaning. Now, here's the thing. Ted Cruz said something about that issue in response to Donald Trump raising it that he knows has to be not true, because I refuse to believe that he isn't smart enough to know it isn't true. He keeps saying that the law on the issue of Article 2 eligibility based on the term natural-born citizen, the term of art, is settled law. And that's absolutely not true. And I'm absolutely convinced that he knows it. So I don't know why he's saying that. Well, I do know why he's saying it. The same reason that his supporters are saying it, because it seems that for a lot of people now, what is or isn't constitutional depends on who you support for a particular office, just like the Obama supporters. And whenever I raise this issue, and I've been raising it for 6 years, I've been writing about this because it did come up in the context of Obama, I get barrages of insults, even though I always preface what I say, and I'll say now. People who I respect, very knowledgeable attorneys who I respect, disagree with me. My friend Andrew McCarthy. Andy McCarthy's been on this program. You guys have heard him on the show. He believes Ted Cruz is eligible. Okay, that's cool. There are a number of other attorneys I respect who believe that he is eligible, that he is an Article 2 natural-born citizen. I always acknowledge that. And after acknowledging that and then stating my position, my opinion, that he's not, because he was not born on American soil, and I believe that that is part of the qualification. And I believe you're going to rely on the citizenship of a parent to confer natural-born citizen status. It has to be your father. I believe that's the understanding. If you want to take a very liberal approach to this, my approach is not that. My approach is natural-born citizen means a person born on American soil of 2 American citizens. Okay, but if you want to take a looser approach and say, no, a natural-born citizen is someone who is born a citizen at the time they're born, then I believe that you have to be born on American soil, number one. But I also believe if you're going to try to rely on anything, it's got to be your father's citizenship. And in case of Ted Cruz and Barack Obama, they're both relying on their mother's citizenship. And I don't think at the time that the founders wrote the Constitution, that's the way they understood the conferring of citizenship on people born in foreign countries to citizens. But anyway, it's very complex and confusing, and I understand people don't want to deal with it, but I can understand why people call me a closed-minded troll, which they do all the time because I bring up this issue. And I guess it's just because, like the Obama supporters, they want to eliminate any obstacles to their guy being president. I mean, I get that. I understand. And believe me, I think Ted Cruz is magnificent, brilliant, courageous, a principled conservative, a man I agree with on a lot of different things. I mean, another issue, though, let me just lay it out here. I've got another issue with him cozying up to Glenn Beck, which I've talked about. Glenn Beck is a clown, a buffoon. I'm sorry. He's just a refugee from a morning zoo. He's poorly educated. He has very little to recommend him, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean he's never said anything I agree with. I'm not saying that either. But I'm just saying, I thought it was very telling when Ted Cruz had a rally about a week ago in Iowa, and he had Glenn Beck up there, and Glenn Beck talked for an hour. It's supposed to be a Ted Cruz event. So he's a very narcissistic clown, this Glenn Beck character. So that's another issue that I have. For me, the natural-born citizen thing is a huge thing. Now, another problem that Ted Cruz has that you're going to hear about, because it's breaking right now, is the Iowa Secretary of State criticizing this mailer that Ted Cruz sent out. What was in this mailer, and why did it upset people? And why did it set Twitter afire? We'll get into that. And then I'm going to talk about the other one that I've got huge issues with. Huge, as Donald Trump would say. And that's Marco Rubio. We'll talk about that. So all of that coming up, and then we'll hear Hillary's answer to the question from her water carrier, George Stephanopoulos. Why is Barack Obama visiting a mosque with terror ties? Why is he doing that? All that and more coming up on this January 31st, last day of January 2016 edition of the Teri O'Brien Show. I will be right back.
You're listening to Informed America Radio.
So, I'm a dog, and I just got adopted by this new human guy, and I'm starting to wonder how he got along without me. I mean, okay, something as simple as walking around the block. He's got this leash thing, and he puts me on one end and him on the other, and I'm just taking him around. I think he's afraid of getting lost. Without that leash and me guiding him along, I don't think he'd find his way back home. But it's kind of cute.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist.
But generally, if you look at how I've tried to govern over the last 4 years and how I'll continue to try to govern, I'm not driven by some ideological agenda. I'm a pretty practical guy, and I just want to make sure that things work. And one of the nice things about never having another election again, I will never campaign again, is I think you can rest assured that all I care about is making sure that I leave behind an America that is stronger, more prosperous, more stable, more secure than it was when I came into office.
Yeah! It may be hard to believe, but people just like you are already saving money. FeedThePig.org makes it easy. Their simple savings plan teaches you how to start saving without going overboard. So you don't need to start foraging wild berries.
I was skeptical, but these are actually pretty good.
You don't need to sell your soul to the devil.
$15 is the best I can do.
You just need FeedThePig.org. Don't get left behind. Get tips and tools at FeedThePig.org. Brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Carrying concealed isn't for everyone. It definitely wasn't for me up until a few years ago. My name is Kimberly Weeks, and I can tell you that violent crimes do happen. My apartment in college was fairly close to campus. We were on a ground floor apartment with 3 bedrooms, very safe. When we signed our lease, they said, we have absolutely 0 crime reports that have happened here. It's a very safe neighborhood. In the early morning hours of May 12th, 2006, I was awakened by a stranger who was holding me down with a shirt covering my face. And he was saying, "Shut up. Don't say anything. Just stay quiet." He stayed in my apartment for the next 2 hours and sexually assaulted me. And at 20 years old, I had to lay there thinking about how I was going to die. Law enforcement in my case was fantastic, but they were there after the crime was committed. I would say that my fear of guns disappeared when I got my second chance at my life. Protecting myself is my right. Michael Bloomberg would like to say that he is doing this to make everyone safer. Unfortunately, Michael Bloomberg is not making me safer. If my right to self-protection is taken away, that leaves me very, very vulnerable and feeling very scared once again. I know how best to defend myself. Mr. Bloomberg, you do not have the right to tell me how to defend myself.
Sassy! Sassy!
This week's episode, Trouble on Rock Hill.
Ain't nothing like running up and down Rock Hill.
Hey, let's move this rock.
Whoa! Sassy! Johnny's stuck under that rock. Yeah, girl. Go tell Mr. Gunderson to bring his truck. You'll tell him, but only after you dispel a stereotype associated with shelter pets? People think shelter pets come with lots of initial veterinary costs?
It's dusty under here.
But in reality, most shelter pets have been vaccinated, neutered, and microchipped in case they get lost?
My pants ripped.
Sassy, Johnny needs help. What Johnny really needs is more discipline and better parental supervision? You use big words, Sassy.
Still under the rock.
Sassy is brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org. Remember, adopt.
Ready for more hot girl on government action? The Terry O'Brien Show, live in vivid red, white, and blue. Every Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time. Or on demand, anytime, at TerryO'Brien.com.
We have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men. George Orwell. You're listening to Informed America Radio.
Terry's book, The ABCs of Barack Obama, Understanding God's Greatest Gift to America, is available on Amazon.com, Smashwords.com, and the iBook store. Get yours today.
She's like a fist inside a velvet glove, softly shattering left-wing stupidity. The Terry O'Brien Show, proud member of the Red State Talk Radio Network.
Red State Talk Radio.
The Talk Monster.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and one based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition.
There he is, B. Hussein Obama, back in the day, back in 2009, here on the Terry O'Brien Show. Yeah, we're going to talk more about Barack Obama and his plan to visit a mosque in Baltimore. And we'll learn more about this mosque. But okay, so I mentioned before we get into talking about the issues I have with Marco Rubio, I mentioned the issues I have with Donald Trump, the issues I have with Ted Cruz, and certainly any of you should feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me at the Terry O'Brien Show at gmail.com. You can reach out to me on the show notes page. You can leave comments there as well at terryobrien.com. And if you happen to be a person who is a friend of the show and helps us keep the lights on either by making a monthly gift, even as little as $5 a month, or contributing at least $100 a year to keeping the show on the air and helping us keep the lights on, you can write to me at your special address, premium at terryobrien.com, and we read and respond to all those notes. But, you know, feel free to reach out to me if you're a supporter of any of these candidates and explain to me why the issues I have are not sufficient to keep me from supporting them. And if you missed the first half hour of the show when I talked about Donald Trump and who did I talk? Oh, Ted Cruz. Yeah, I'm getting into Marco Rubio in a second. Listen and tell me what you think. Where am I going wrong? Now, one last thing about Ted Cruz that you're going to hear about is this mailer that his campaign sent out. And the Secretary of State is a little bit upset. Paul Pate calls this mailer misleading. And I will tell you that Secretary of State Paul Pate is a Republican. He's not a Democrat. But he says what happened was they sent out this mailer, and it's got kind of a scary sticker on the front of it that says, like, voting violation in capital letters. And it says that the person getting this, the recipient, is getting it, quote, because of low expected voter turnout in your area. Quote, your individual voting history, as well as your neighbors, are public record. The flyer reads, quote, their scores are published below, and many of them will see your score as well. Caucus on Monday to improve your score, and please encourage your neighbors to caucus as well. A follow-up notice may be issued following Monday's caucuses. Basically, if you're a bad citizen who doesn't participate, we're going to tell all your neighbors. We're going to shame you into showing up to caucus. Well, of course, as the Secretary of State points out, there's no such thing as a voting violation for not voting. We don't have mandatory voting in this country, in any state. So this is just designed to shame people into showing up. Now, is that going to help Ted Cruz? His campaign obviously thinks so. And I will tell you one thing that he learned from Donald Trump is he's not going to apologize. I think that's one thing that the campaigns have all learned. Never apologize. No matter what happens, don't apologize. And he says, Cruz said last night in Sioux City, Iowa, that, quote, he would apologize to nobody for using every tool we can to encourage Iowa voters to come out and vote. So, what do you think of this? Oh, it's a little marginal. It's a little marginal, and I think it could backfire. I don't know what you think. Tell me in the chat room. Okay, so that is not one of my objections to Ted Cruz, the whole thing with the mailer. That's not. But this thing about him not being a natural-born citizen pursuant to Article 2 and running around stating something that we know is not, he has to know it's not true that the law is settled. The law is not settled. That's just not true. Now, speaking of another guy who might not be a natural-born citizen, certainly is not under my definition, which, as I said earlier, to me, the term of art natural-born citizen in Article 2, used there and only there, in the only place in the Constitution, to state the qualifications for being president, means an American born on American soil to two American citizens at the time of that person's birth. Now, the parents don't have to be born, in the country. A person could be a naturalized citizen and have a child on American soil, and that person would, in my opinion, be an Article 2 natural-born citizen. I think it's very clear from reading the writings at the time and what concerned the founders, and the fact that James Madison went back and revised that Naturalization Act from 1790, which seemed to suggest that people born on foreign soil to citizens or people that didn't meet the criteria that I just stated were natural-born citizens. They went back and changed that in 1795, and that's James Madison. He's the father of the Constitution. So, I think that's compelling, but no court has ever ruled. So, to suggest that otherwise is just not true, and I think Ted Cruz knows that. So, okay, so that's a problem. But Marco Rubio is not a natural-born citizen either, under my definition, because his parents weren't citizens at the time he was born. Anyway, but, with the good news for all of you guys who are supporting Ted Cruz, and you don't have to send me a bunch of vicious, slanderous tweets and Facebook postings and tell me what a closed-minded troll I am, even though I am perfectly willing to state that this is just my opinion and one that's not shared by everyone. Even people I respect disagree with me. But the good news for all of you is that this is something that's never going to stop anybody from being president. The fact that Barack Obama is squatting in the Oval Office proves it. So I wouldn't get upset. I mean, I think the reason a lot of the Cruz supporters get upset is they think that's going to stop him from getting the nomination, or it's going to stop him from winning the election. And frankly, I don't think the majority of people care about this issue. I think the level of literacy about the Constitution in this country is so low that most people wouldn't even know what I was talking about. If I said, what's an Article 2 natural born citizen? If I went on the street and stood there with a clipboard like Barack Obama used to do and asked people, I bet I would get mostly blank stares. So, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it. But I mean, that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about it because I know it is an issue. Because I did take an oath to uphold the Constitution when I was sworn into the bar. But let's talk about Marco Rubio. Okay, number one, not a natural-born citizen under my definition. Probably doesn't matter. But second problem, and really, really big problem, is this whole issue of amnesty. I do not believe that we can trust Marco Rubio on the issue of amnesty. Now, he's swearing up and down, saying that, everything's changed since 2013. He's seen the light. We've seen a lot of problems with people coming over the border since 2013. And, but you guys remember, I was warning him and saying back in 2012, 2013, look, do not think you're going to go into a conference with Chuck Schumer and not have your ass handed to you, Marco. And that's even if he didn't really want amnesty, which I think he does. Now, I've dredged up this Breitbart article, which I will put in the show notes. Now, you guys know that after every show, we post show notes at terryobrien.com. You don't have to look up any of these stories. They're all there, and you have all the information you need, because that's the goal of this program, to give you the information you need to be an informed citizen without having to go dig all this stuff out. I mean, you guys could go dig all this out, but it would take a lot of time. And I watch so you don't have to, and I read this stuff so you don't have to. Now, this Breitbart story from November is quite interesting. It's all about an interview that Marco Rubio had with Jorge Ramos. Now, you know Jorge Ramos. He's, the Univision, Mr. Amnesty. He's a guy that I believe votes in Mexico and the United States. I'm not sure how that works, but I believe that's true. And this story is quite enlightening, and I think all of you should read it, by Julia Hahn from November 2nd, 2015. In a little noticed interview earlier this year with Univision's Jorge Ramos, Senator Marco Rubio declared that as president, he would keep Barack Obama's executive amnesty for dreamers in place until it was permanently codified through legislation. Gee, I wonder if would apply to that dreamer guy we talked about last week, the one that had the 3-year-old stuffed in a bag in a closet, duct taped, and sitting in her own excrement and pimping her out to his prostitution clients. Remember that story? If you missed that, go to the show notes at terryobrien.com. But that guy was one of Obama's dreamers. He's here in the country, courtesy of DACA. But okay, so he doesn't want to get rid of it until it's, so basically, here's how it works. Obama takes his pen and phone and he breaks the law by allowing these so-called dreamers to be in the country illegally. And then Rubio says, well, we'll just keep that illegal action by Obama in place until we can go back and ratify it retroactively as Congress. So, Congress basically refused to do this many times. This whole dreamer thing was brought up time and again, since 2010 at least. And Congress refused to do it because the people don't want it. And it's unfortunate that these children were brought into the country by their law-breaking parents, but all children, as you know, are at the mercy of the behavior of their parents. If a parent is a lawbreaker, if a guy robs a bank, if a guy commits armed robbery in a 7-Eleven, or a woman does, we don't say, well, we can't send that person to prison because that person has children and through no fault of their own, they're going to be deprived of a parent. I mean, they are. And that's unfortunate. The children are collateral damage. But all children are at the mercy of the behavior of adults. That's how it works. And so these children, unfortunately, and Ted Cruz, to his credit, did say law breaking has consequences. But not Marco Rubio. He says, we've got Obama breaking the law, and we'll just keep that in place until we can go back and ratify it, even though Congress refused to do this for time and again, at least since 2010. Rubio said during this interview, DACA, and that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, if you don't know, applies to young people. And he says that arrived in this country. I think he means who arrived in this country at a very young age before they were adults. And I don't think we can immediately revoke that. I'm not calling for it to be revoked or tomorrow or this week or right away. I think it will have to end at some point, and I hope it will end because of some reform to the immigration laws, Rubio said in English. He could talk in English and Spanish, apparently, in this interview. So Rubio is pledging to carry Obama's policy, leaving the executive amnesty for Dreamers in place until Congress submits to the order by legislatively ratifying amnesty. After a legislatively ratified DREAM Act, illegals would be able to vote in U.S. elections and bring their relatives to work and collect entitlements in the U.S. And Julia Hahn notes here in Breitbart, the similarity to President Obama's rhetoric is striking. President Obama told Congress, quote, if folks are serious about getting immigration reform done, they should be passing a bill and getting it to my desk. And then the executive actions that I take will go away. So I love that argument. It's basically, all right, the people don't want a particular policy and a particular piece of legislation that would make that law. So I'll just do it illegally. And then when you submit to my will and pass a law that ratifies it, then I'll take away my illegal action. Rubio is saying exactly the same thing. So Obama said to those members of Congress who question my authority to make our immigration system work better or question the wisdom of me acting where Congress has failed, I have one answer: pass a bill. Now, let's get back to the interview with Jorge Ramos and Rubio. In the interview, Ramos asked Rubio something that Rubio has not been asked in any of the presidential debates thus far. Would a President Rubio revoke deferred action and executive action by President Barack Obama? That's a pretty straightforward question. And by the way, that would be nice if that were asked in a presidential debate, so-called, And if you saw this debate the other night, the one that Trump didn't go to, oh, boy, I'm telling you, I was sticking myself with pins to try to stay awake. That was a real snooze fest. I mean, the only excitement in that debate was wondering if Megyn Kelly's false eyelashes were going to stab me through the TV. That was about the most exciting thing in the whole thing. But, I mean, it would be nice to have him ask this question, Rubio. So he was asked by Ramos, and Rubio said that he would not, quote, immediately revoke, unquote, Obama's 2012 executive amnesty for illegal minors. Quote, I'm not calling for it to be revoked tomorrow or this week or right away. He said, we have two executive actions. The first was DACA, which applies to young people that arrived in this country at a very young age before they were adults, and I don't think we can immediately revoke that. And I would say, why can't we? I don't understand why we can't. I think it will have to end at some point, and I hope it will end because of some reform to the immigration laws, basically ratifying it so it doesn't have to end. It cannot be the permanent policy of the United States, but I'm not calling for it to be revoked tomorrow or this week or right away. So, I mean, he's saying it has to end at some point, but he's saying the executive action will end only because we'll have legislation that does the same thing, which is what the American people never wanted. So, I mean, I just don't think we can support Rubio because I just don't think we can trust him. This story also talks about the fact that this DREAM Act thing is potentially very expansive. That one official here, Ken Palinkas, the former head of the nation's immigration caseworkers, Citizenship and Immigration Services, warned that the DREAM Act would expand birthright citizenship to include the foreign-born, today as applied to the U.S.-born children of illegal aliens. So Palinka said that the Dreamer amnesty, quote, extends birthright citizenship in the future to include the foreign citizens of other countries, unquote, and presents a promise of, quote, perpetual amnesty, unquote. Yeah, and of course it does. If you can say, you know, it's basically a permanent loophole, isn't it, to the border. So I think basically it wipes out the immigration laws. It carves out this group of illegals because they're minors that are basically exempt from the immigration law. And then, of course, if their parents are with them, if they can drag a kid across the border, it's almost like, you know, an anchor baby that was born overseas, but now you carry them over the border and now they're, you know, an anchor baby. It's just, it's completely outrageous. And you know that Dave Bratt, the guy that defeated Eric Cantor, and by the way, let's all remember that if Eric Cantor had not been defeated, and we know Eric Cantor was the former leader in the House, Eric Cantor of Virginia, but Dave Bratt, the guy who beat him on the issue of immigration. And Bratt, when he was campaigning against Cantor, described Cantor's support for the DREAM Act as, quote, one of the most radical pro-amnesty statements ever delivered by a sitting representative. In, quote, in what was billed as a new agenda for the Republican Party, Cantor declared that citizenship for illegals was required by the great founding principles of our country. With this remark, Cantor declared his support not only for amnesty now, but amnesty forever. And I will tell you, that's the end of the country, people. That's it. So, you know, the Democrats are, as we've discussed many times on this program, they're absolutely devoted to the idea of changing the country, changing the voters. They couldn't get the voters, all the voters in this country, to go along with their program. So if they couldn't get people in this country, you know, people whose grandparents were citizens and great-grandparents were citizens of this country, to go along with a lot of their big government agenda, the solution isn't to persuade anybody. The solution is basically just to change the electorate. And that's the whole idea of this amnesty. And of course, the seeding of the country with these Muslim refugees, so-called, which is what we're going to talk about later in the program. So, I mean, I don't think we can trust Marco Rubio on the issue of amnesty. And to me, given the fact that, as I always say, I have never been a single issue voter, but it's getting to the point now where on this issue of amnesty, I believe it's an existential issue for this country. And by that, I mean, the country is going to not be the country anymore. This will not be the United States of America anymore if we don't get a hold of this issue of the open borders and amnesty. And of course, Ted Cruz is saying a vote for Marco Rubio is a vote for amnesty. Well, I can't say that he's wrong based on everything that I've seen. You know, Rubio will really not disclaim his support for the Gang of Eight bill. He still will run around saying things like, I'm trying to solve a problem. Well, you know, I don't think ratifying Obama's illegality is a way to solve a problem. I mean, that's just me. So I think, you know, we should all listen to the words of Jeff Sessions, who talked about this amnesty and Obama's lawlessness. And he said the president's unconstitutional action is a direct threat to our Republican system of government and will have catastrophic consequences for the American people. It must be stopped. Congress has no higher duty than to protect the American people and our Constitution. The president's action is a threat to every working person in this country, their jobs, wages, dreams, hopes, and futures. And I could not agree more. Now, coming up in the next hour of the program, of course, we will hear the answer to George Stephanopoulos' question to Hillary, which we opened the program with. If you didn't hear that, George asked her about the non-disclosure agreement that she signed when she became Secretary of State, in which she agreed that she would protect all information that was important to national security, whether it was marked classified or not. And this whole marked classified little gambit is starting to wear very thin. So I asked her about that, and we'll hear the non-answer answer. Also, let's see, what else do we have coming up? We've got, why is Obama visiting a mosque with terror ties? The first mosque he's ever visited in the United States. And why did Fox News invite a Muslim activist and Bernie Sanders supporter to be one of the people asking questions at that debate last week? Which, was, as I said, if you didn't, I watched So You Don't Have To, but trust me, you really didn't miss anything if you didn't see it. I had a tough time staying awake. So we'll talk about that. And, good news for the Denver Broncos. You guys supporting, as I watch all this coverage on the Sunday shows, it is sort of like Super Bowl coverage. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? Anyway, all that and more on this January 31st edition of the Teri O'Brien Show. Be right back.
She's America's original conservative warrior princess, daring to fearlessly and, more importantly, cheerfully commit common sense in the age of Obama.
You're different from other girls. That's what you think. You're smarter. You're almost like a man.
You're listening to the Teri O'Brien Show.
Michael Bloomberg and his anti-gun group Mayors Against Illegal Guns recently launched a multi-million-dollar ad campaign featuring this curious gun owner.
For me, guns are for hunting and protecting my family. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I'll fight to protect it. But with rights come responsibilities. That's why I support comprehensive background checks.
We've asked Mayors Against Illegal Guns for his identity, but so far, no luck. Every gun owner watching probably noticed the closed bolt, the finger dangerously close to the trigger, and the direction the gun is pointing, which, particularly in the presence of children, is not responsible firearms handling. We have to assume that the gun is loaded and that this quote-unquote gun owner is not as familiar with firearms as he would have us believe. The NRA recommends Mayor Bloomberg use some of his money to sign this man up for one of our industry standard firearm courses. Is it possible he's an actor?
Me, a cat, moving in with a single guy. At first, I thought it might be a little weird, but turns out it's actually pretty amusing. For instance, my human's gotten so used to me being around, sometimes I think he forgets I'm here. He'll get up for work, shower, shave, and come out with no pants. Plops right down in front of the TV. Hello, there's a lady in the room.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Sassy! Sassy!
This week's episode, Fire at the Shed.
Gee, Johnny, this rope swing sure is swell.
Don't I know it?
Hey, it's Sassy!
I think she's trying to tell us something. Mr. Gunderson? What about Mr. Gunderson?
A fire? Mr. Gunderson's trapped?
Where, Sassy, where?
What, Sassy? Now that you've got our attention, you'd like to take a moment to talk about shelter pets? Shelter pets in general are well-adjusted, healthy, and love being with people?
Sassy, we don't have time!
Pets often end up in shelters due to owner problems like divorce or allergies?
That's great, Sassy, but what about the fire?
There is no fire! You're just messing with our heads?
Sassy!
Sassy is brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org. Remember, adopt.
This message is for all of you sitting in the passenger seat. And apologies if it gets a little uncomfortable. But how does it feel to be at the mercy of someone who thinks a random text is more important than your life? Someone who takes their eyes off the road while speeding along in a 3-ton hunk of steel. Freaky, right? Well, why not just ask them to stop? Or better yet, volunteer to text for them. It might be a little awkward, but believe me, you'll live.
Learn more at stoptextsstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago. You know it as one of the most dangerous cities in America. I know it as something less than America, a place where the law doesn't matter. It's illegal for criminal gang members, drug dealers, and felons to even touch a gun. Chicago's politicians could clean the streets tomorrow just by enforcing that federal law. But they would rather attack the gun rights of good people than crack down on the violent criminals who terrorize them. So law-abiding Southsiders put their kids to bed to the sound of gunfire, with no hope but to pray it doesn't come closer. Chicago's injustice is America's problem. Either we fight this cancer of corruption or we pray it doesn't come closer. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
We just want to say that we're not Spirit Bunnies anymore. We always hated that name. It bugged the heck out of Dina and me. It's just such a put-down. Really. We know you've got a lot of spirit, everybody, right? And we're going to destroy Lincoln next week, all right? You know, it takes a lot of courage to get up here and do something that you know people will make fun of.
Ooh, what a girl. She's always in a whirl. Always going new places, seeing new faces. That girl on the go.
Teri O'Brien.
Wonderful girl on the go.
I know you think people are going to be interested in this, but they're not.
Oh, come on, Jerry. That's not true. Welcome to the second big hour of the Teri O'Brien Show. And just to add a little bit more to this whole question about Marco Rubio and amnesty, there's an excellent piece that I will put in the show notes from December 19th of last year by John Hawkins of Right Wing News, and it's from Town Hall, The Ugly Truth About Marco Rubio and His Gang of Eight Amnesty Bill. And this is really devastating because it goes into what a lot of people were saying about this bill back in 2013. And also what Marco Rubio said back when he was running for the Senate and how, you know, he never would have defeated Charlie Crist if he did not take this very tough stand on amnesty. Then he gets to the Senate and he's suddenly Chuck Schumer's best friend. I just think, not good. Other election news, let's see, Governor Branstad in Iowa. If you guys are interested in Iowa, who isn't interested in Iowa? Although I do know people whose intelligence I respect, and I can't completely disagree with this statement that the whole Iowa caucuses thing is really overblown and kind of stupid because they never pick the winner anyway. That's kind of true. But, you know, that's all that if you watch the pretend news, that's all the pretend news is about. Meanwhile, we have actual serious issues that we're going to talk about, including the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember those guys? Yeah. You know, we don't hear enough about them, and we need to hear more because this whole seeding the country with Muslims, this is playing right into the plans that they talked about back in 1991. You guys know that back in 1991, a document was uncovered that pretty much explains how the Muslim Brotherhood, through all these little front groups that they have set up, wants to take over Western countries, including the United States, from within. That this fifth column is pretty much their strategy. And that was in this 1991 document that was part of the evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial back in 2008. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in election news, and we are going to talk a little Hillary this hour as well, the Iowa governor, the one who's so mad at Ted Cruz because he doesn't like ethanol subsidies, is going to campaign with Chris Christie, apparently. So now I mentioned in the little note that I send out to those of you who contribute monthly to the show that some people have won some big endorsements. Well, apparently Chris Christie has the endorsement of the Iowa governor, which I didn't know. But guess who got that coveted New York Times endorsement? Do you guys know? Oh, none other than the pathetic lying rhino, John Kasich, the guy with the bizarre judo chop hand gestures when he's in the debates. That guy, the guy who I heard somewhere his dad was a mailman. Is that true? Yeah, it's kind of like John Kerry served in Vietnam. You know, he can't open his mouth. You know, he goes in to order a cup of coffee and he'll say, yeah, you know, I'll have a grande latte and my dad was a mailman. I mean, he can't, you know, it's like some sort of weird Tourette's thing. Well, he got that coveted New York Times endorsement. They called him the only plausible candidate. So I think that tells you everything you need to know right there. And then, guess who endorsed Hillary? Well, you know about Susan Sarandon. And, you know, I mean, let's face it, if you can't get the endorsement of an actor, because, you know, actors, they are, I mean, unquestionably the smartest people, right? They're the ones that they dress them up, they put them in the makeup chair, they tell them exactly where to stand, they point the camera at them, and then they say what we wrote for you. Say what we told you to say and say it convincingly, you know. So, I mean, if you can show me somebody better to get an endorsement about who to be president, then I'd like to see that person. But no, not another actor, none other than the CIA, the outed CIA operative, Valerie Plame. So she's going to campaign for Hillary along with Gabby Giffords. Now here's the best endorsement of all. Chuck Hagel. Remember poor old Chuck Hagel? I mean, toward the end, I actually felt sorry for him. I mean, he is sort of a unintentional comic figure in a lot of ways. It's like Mr. Kruger on Seinfeld. Speaking of Seinfeld, you know, kind of like, whatever, you know. Well, he's endorsing a guy that isn't even in the race right now, and that would be Michael Bloomberg. So assuming Michael Bloomberg decides to take the plunge, which he may very well if he doesn't like what he sees, he'll have Chuck Hagel there in his corner. So that's good to know. Now, before we leave the endorsements, let me mention one endorsement for Marco Rubio, since I've been hammering away at his support for amnesty. Brian Teri, you may remember, the Border Patrol agent who was murdered with a Fast and Furious gun, his sister has actually endorsed Marco Rubio. So, you know, people would say, well, I mean, I'm sure the reason they wanted that endorsement is they could say, hey, this guy was murdered as part of this whole border problem. Would his sister endorse somebody that isn't going to stick up for supporting the border or securing the border? I'm not really persuaded. Okay, so let's get into this Obama thing. So the White House has announced, and they announced it yesterday. I don't know if they announced it on a Saturday for the same reason that we get all the Hillary Clinton email dumps on Friday nights before holidays. But they announced yesterday that Barack Obama is going to visit a mosque, and it's the first time he's visited a mosque in the U.S. during his presidency. I don't know about before that or after that or as a young person. I do know, of course, he spent some time living in Indonesia. And as I often say, I'm never going to accuse Barack Obama of being a Muslim because I frankly think he's a godless communist. But I won't say he's a Muslim, but I will say he's a Muslim sympathizer. And at the risk of engaging in what some might call psychobabble, I'll also say that when you look at Barack Obama's very twisted family tree and very dysfunctional upbringing, the only time he had anything that was remotely close to a normal family was when he was living with his mother, his stepfather, and his half-sister in Indonesia. I mean, they were sort of like a nuclear family as opposed to living just with your mom, living with your grandparents. So, I mean, I would not blame him for thinking fondly of those times, and I think it's very clear that he is a Muslim sympathizer.
Assalamu alaikum.
Right, Barack, I get it. Okay, so is it a coincidence that he didn't visit any mosques during his first term when he was going to have to run for re-election? But it's interesting, this mosque that he has chosen. The Baltimore Mosque, and I'm reading from a story in the Daily Caller by Chuck Ross. The Baltimore Mosque President Obama has chosen as the first U.S.-based mosque to visit during his presidency has deep ties to extremist elements, including the Muslim Brotherhood. The White House announced on Saturday that Obama will visit the Islamic Society of Baltimore, ISB, on Wednesday. He has visited several mosques overseas as president, but has resisted visiting one in the homeland. The purpose of the trip, according to the White House, is to celebrate, and that's in quotes, quote, celebrate the contributions of Muslim Americans make to our nation and reaffirm the importance of religious freedom to our way of life. Oh, that is so beautiful. Has he told the Little Sisters of the Poor about that? The ones that he's trying to force them to buy abortifacient drugs as part of Obamacare. Actually, the Supreme Court is going to hear their case. So, and I guess that religious freedom in that area doesn't count. But anyway, but ISB, according to this article in the Daily Caller by Chuck Ross, is a curious choice for Obama's first domestic visit. The mosque is a member of a network of mosques controlled by the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA, a Muslim civil rights group named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the 2008 Holy Land Foundation terror case. Several executives with that organization were convicted of sending money to aid the terrorist group Hamas. An imam who served at ISB for a total of 15 years has also been a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood network and has worked for an Islamic relief group that was designated as a terrorist organization by the Treasury Department in 2004. Mohammed Adam al-Sheikh, who served 2 stints as ISB's imam from 1983 to 1989 and from 1994 to 2003, was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan in the 1970s. He also co-founded the Muslim American Society, a Falls Church, Virginia-based group that is controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. While in Baltimore, El-Sheikh served as a regional director for the Islamic American Relief Agency. That group's parent organization is the Islamic African Relief Agency, which the Treasury Department says provided funds to Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and other terrorist organizations. After leaving Baltimore, El-Sheikh served as imam at the infamous Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church. That mosque has a lengthy roster of known terrorists and terrorist sympathizers. Its imam during much of the 1990s was Mohammed al-Hanoudi. He was named an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which killed 6 people. Now, if that name, Dar al-Hijra, sounds familiar, here's why. Continuing with the story. Dar al-Hijra came under control of Anwar al-Awlaki in 2001. He's the American al-Qaeda recruiter who was killed in a U.S. drone strike in 2011. Nidal Hassan, the U.S. Army major who killed 13 people at Fort Hood in November 2009, is said to have attended the Virginia Mosque when al-Awlaki served there. The pair also reportedly exchanged emails. 2 of the 9/11 hijackers also attended Dar al-Hijra during al-Awlaki's tenure. So this guy that was the imam in Baltimore was also the imam at this infamous mosque where all these known terrorists actually hung out. Now, let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And I will link, by the way, to this story. It's quite lengthy, talking about this mosque. But remember back in, what year was it, 2011, when Barack Obama did an interview with Bill O'Reilly about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because remember, at that time, the Obama regime was supporting the Muslim Brotherhood's takeover of Egypt. Remember that whole Morsi thing, Mohammed Morsi thing? And they were supporting the takeover of Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood. And O'Reilly, during the Super Bowl interview, which this will be 5 years ago, asked about that.
The Muslim Brotherhood, great concern to a lot of people. They a threat to the USA.
I think that the Muslim Brotherhood is one faction in Egypt. They don't have majority support in Egypt. But they are well organized, and there are strains of their ideology that are anti-U.S. There's no doubt about it. But here's the thing that we have to understand. There are a whole bunch of secular folks in Egypt. There are a whole bunch of educators and civil society in Egypt that wants to come to the fore as well. And so it's important for us not to say that our only two options are either the Muslim Brotherhood or a suppressed
but you don't want the Muslim
Egyptian
Brotherhood.
people. What I want is a representative government in Egypt, and I have confidence that if Egypt moves in an orderly transition process, that we'll have a government in Egypt that we can work with together as a partner.
Those are tough boys, the Muslim Brotherhood. I wouldn't want them anywhere near that government.
Bill O'Reilly talking to Barack Obama back in 2011 about Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, those of you who are listening to the Teri O'Brien Show, being as well informed as you are, probably know that Mohammed Morsi, the guy that the Obama regime was supporting, the Muslim Brotherhood guy, eventually became president as a result of an uprising back in 2011. And of course, our government threw our ally Hosni Mubarak under the bus. And then in 2013, in July, Morsi ended up being deposed by the army because people were in the streets, just absolutely apoplectic about his rule as president of Egypt. And he was sentenced back in May of last year to death, a sentence that has been upheld. And why was he sentenced to death? For a jailbreak. He and a bunch of other Muslim Brotherhood types engineered this jailbreak. And so he was accused of colluding with foreign militants to free Islamists during this prison break. So, he's sentenced to death. I don't know, when they're going to carry out that sentence. I do know it's been upheld. But it's interesting, what side were we on? And now we have Obama going to visit this mosque with the Muslim Brotherhood ties. Now, the thing you need to understand is the Muslim Brotherhood, this is an organization, if you've never read the book, The Looming Tower, you definitely need to read that book because that book really goes into the whole history of the Muslim Brotherhood and how all this radical Islamic ideology developed. And all started back in the 1920s is when all this started. And I mentioned earlier that back in 1991, there was a document prepared from to go along with the meeting. There's a meeting in 1991 that outlined the Muslim Brotherhood's strategic goals for North America. And this 1991 document was discovered by federal investigators during a search of the home of a guy named Ismail al-Barasi. And who is he? He's a founder of, guess what? The Dar al-Hijra Mosque and Falls Church, the one I just mentioned, the one where al-Waqi was, the one where this imam that was at this mosque where Obama's going to go on Wednesday was also an imam. So this Ismail al-Arbasi had this document in his home. It was discovered during a 2004 search, and it was introduced as evidence in the 2008 Holy Land terror funding trial. And it's from 1991. And basically, it just describes the strategic plan that the Muslim Brotherhood has for establishing Islam and taking over the United States and turning our country into an Islamic country. And I will link in the show notes to a copy of this document, and there's another great little summary here by the Clarion Project that talks about this document and has also the document in it. But just to share a little bit, on page 7, the process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. We must possess a mastery of the art of coalitions, the art of absorption, and the principles of cooperation. And so the Muslim Brotherhood, unlike some of the other Islamist groups, they have a different strategy. Their strategy is not necessarily to commit violent acts of terrorism. They let Hamas do that, and they're affiliated with Hamas, and they share money with Hamas and Hezbollah, and they support whatever these guys do. But as part of their desire to take over this country, that's not how they want to do it. They want to infiltrate. They want to have all these various front groups like CARE and a variety of other groups that, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, this Islamic Society of America, and all these various groups that they actually set up as part of this idea, this strategy, to basically be a fifth column and take over the country from within. And that's the strategy. So they're not, I'm not saying that they're not, that they're a nonviolent group. They just don't think violence in this country is going to be the best way to take over the country. And that's actually what they desire to do. Now, I will tell you that our government has refused to condemn the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, as you heard Barack Obama there, he didn't want to say anything too negative because, no, he was on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, our country took the side of Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood over a longtime ally. Well, the UK, back in December, and this story is a Fox News story from Christmas, UK condemns Muslim Brotherhood and break from Obama administration. A powerful report by the UK government accuses the Muslim Brotherhood of being sympathetic to terrorists and a risk to British national security, striking a contrast with the Obama administration's more conciliatory approach, and fueling criticism that the U.S. government should wake up to the threat. Well, maybe our government, or maybe the person in charge of our government, doesn't think it is a threat.
He's a Kenyan-born Muslim who's lied about his religion, who's rooting for the terrorists.
Well, Chris, I'm not sure about the lying about the religion. As I said, I'm not sure he actually believes in any religion other than Marxism. But as far as whose side he's rooting for, I don't think we can tell. They won't condemn the Muslim Brotherhood. Anyway, back to this report. Nal Gardner, who is the director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom, told Fox News, quote, "I think the report is a damning indictment of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's a very realistic assessment of the nature of the Brotherhood itself." And David Cameron ordered this review back in 2014, and the whole report is classified, but they did allow some of the main findings to be revealed. The report found that supporting Hamas was an important priority for the Brotherhood. It noted that while the group at times has renounced violence, senior figures have repeatedly defended Hamas attacks on Israel and justified attacks against coalition forces in the U.S. and Afghanistan. Also, while the Muslim Brotherhood has criticized al-Qaeda, leaders have claimed that the 9/11 attacks were fabricated by the U.S. government and that the war on terror is merely a pretext to attack Muslim countries. The report concludes that while the Brotherhood has preferred nonviolent methods on the grounds of expediency, quote, They are prepared to countenance violence, including from time to time terrorism, where gradualism is ineffective. So said a report from the British government. Egypt's military-backed government labeled the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist group in December 2013, a matter of months after the military helped topple the government of the Muslim Brotherhood's Mohammed Morsi, and that would be the guy that Obama was supporting, by the way. Okay, so there's that. And so we know that he's visiting this mosque. It has these terror ties. The regime refuses to condemn this known terrorist group, the Muslim Brotherhood. And let's talk a little bit about how we mentioned that the strategy that they guys came up with that was detailed in this 1991 document. How are they implementing this? Well, part of how they're implementing it is by taking over the education system. At TeriO'Brien.com earlier this week, I posted about a Washington Free Beacon article about a public school in Maryland. A public school in Maryland is being sued for promoting Islam over other religions. The lawsuit was filed in federal court on Wednesday on behalf of a former Marine and his wife who fought back at their daughter's high school for forcing students to complete assignments that endorsed Islam. The Thomas More Law Center filed the civil rights complaint in the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, accusing leaders at the Charles County Public Schools of violating plaintiffs' constitutional rights. John Kevin Wood, who served 8 years in the Marines, and his wife Melissa objected when they discovered that their daughter's world history class at La Plata High School was circulating assignments that amounted to Islamic propaganda. Their daughter and her fellow students were instructed to write out the Islamic creed, which says there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. When recited by non-Muslims, the creed amounts to a conversion to Islam. I hope I didn't just convert to Islam. The students were also required to memorize and recite the 5 pillars of Islam and were subjected to disparaging teachings about Christianity. Quote, most Muslims' faith is stronger than the average Christian, unquote, one worksheet read. The class also spent one day covering Christianity, while teachers devoted 2 weeks to instructing about Islam. And this is just one story. There's a bunch of stories like this. I will put them in the show notes of various schools all over the country. And of course, this is part of the strategy. Now, I'm not saying that this teacher or this school district is getting its marching orders from the Muslim Brotherhood, but it's just the left, right? I mean, they despise America as what they would perceive as traditional America as a white Christian country. And so naturally, they're going to take the opposite side, the oppressed, Muslims. Now, one final thing to throw on the fire here as we talk about this. I mentioned this debate earlier this week, this Republican debate on Fox News, the one most of you didn't see, which you didn't miss anything. But they had all these YouTubers. Well, one of these YouTubers that they had is not only a Bernie Sanders supporter, number one, but also she is an Islamic activist, and she used one word that is an automatic red flag that should make everybody's antenna go up. So I'll talk about that on the other side, and then we'll hear Hillary Clinton lying her ass off. So all that coming up in the last half hour of the Teri O'Brien Show. I'll be right back.
This is Andy McCarthy, and you're listening to the Teri O'Brien Show.
I know you're watching, so pay attention. You hate my freedom, my religion, and my country. You hate me for speaking my mind. You try to control me with violence and intimidation. You think you can muzzle me with fear? Don't ever confuse me for my politicians or my media. I am an American, free-born and free-bred, and I will call you out for who you are. An Islamic extremist who would kill me for my beliefs. You don't intimidate me. My freedom is more powerful than anything you can possibly do. And I will never, never surrender my rights to your terror. I will say what I think, worship according to my beliefs, and raise my children how I see fit. And I defend it all with the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I cower to no one, because I am the National Rifle Association of America, and I am freedom's safest place.
Sassy! Sassy!
This week's episode, Rattlesnake at the Pond.
Oh, Johnny, skipping rocks at the pond sure is fun.
Hey, look, a moving stick.
That ain't a stick. That's a rattlesnake.
Sassy, we're in danger.
Good idea, Sassy. Go get Mr. Gunderson. You will in a second, but first you'd like to tell us something we may not know about animal shelters in the United States?
It's getting close, Sassy.
Approximately 8 million pets enter shelters each year? The majority of which are in shelters because of owner-related issues that the animals have no control over?
Sassy the rattlesnake! Save us, Sassy!
What, Sassy? You wish you were videotaping this? Sassy!
Sassy is brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org. Remember, adopt.
Can you tell if these vegetables are being contaminated with bacteria that could cause paralysis? Listen. Can't, can you? You can't see it either. Use different cutting boards so that the bacteria in raw meats and seafood and their juices doesn't touch prep surfaces for other foods, like veggies. Raw food may contain bacteria that can make you very sick, or worse. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year, and roughly 3,000 will die. But you can keep your family safer by separating raw meats and seafood from other foods. Learn more about this and other important information. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov. That's foodsafety.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
There was once upon a time that to be a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. But I remember the story of a fellow who was running for office as a Republican, and he was in a rural area and it wasn't known to be Republican, and he stopped by a farm to do some campaigning. And when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped and he said, "Wait right here till I go get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got her, and the candidate looked around for a podium from which to give his speech, and the only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. And at the end of it, the farmer said, "That's the first time I ever heard a Republican speech." And the candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform."
Yeah, hey, did you guys see Obama was over at that G20 and he was up on the stage, and then like 3 cats came up on the stage, so actually there were 4 pussies up there.
Challenging and defeating the left-wing agenda of the mainstream media, The Teri O'Brien Show. The Teri O'Brien Show airs live in vivid red, white, and blue, Sundays, 4 to 6 p.m. Central.
I think that most liberals are well-intentioned but misguided. They're like children who have the luxury of believing in the political equivalent of the tooth fairy. They need some tough love. They need a big ol' healthy dose of common sense and information. And when they get it, the smart ones will become conservative. Politically incorrect? Damn straight I am. Got a problem with that?
All stations, prepare for reconnection.
When you listen to The Teri O'Brien Show, you're going to hear the news that everyone will be talking about on Monday. Politics, the culture, the media, celebrities, everything important that affects your life, and some things that don't, but still amaze, amuse, or disgust you. Provocative, informative, and occasionally snarky, you might be enraged, but you will never be bored. Strap in for the wild ride with America's original conservative warrior princess. Ready for more hot girl on government action? The Teri O'Brien Show.
Yeah!
live in vivid red, white, and blue. Every Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time, or on demand anytime at TeriO'Brien.com.
She's about as hard right and at least, if not more, articulate than Limbaugh.
Well, she's popular.
There's something about this bitch that's really spectacular.
Yeah, for a popular girl, she's pretty popular.
She's about being sensible.
Well, she can make them talk about themselves, the way it says girls should do in those teenage columns.
Know-it-all, bitch. Basically, I'm in love with her. Enough!
Oh, yeah. The Teri O'Brien Show every Sunday, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and anytime on demand at TeriO'Brien.com. Or, as I say, if you go get the Spreaker app for your smartphone or tablet, you can listen anytime you want on demand. Just do a search in Spreaker for Informed America Radio. Same thing on the website, Spreaker.com, Informed America Radio, or iTunes. And please leave your comments. And thanks to those of you who post at TeriO'Brien.com, who retweet our information that we shared there. And of course, I can't let this pass without giving a shout out to our angels who go and drop a few pennies in the tip jar, because that's the only reason this show is continuing to be here, is because those of you who generously support it make it possible. Because, I talked last week about the fact that one of my fellow hosts on Red State Talk Radio, where this show is syndicated, had decided he just had to stop doing his show because, you have to buy equipment and you have to buy bandwidth and all these things. And as he put it, it was turning into an expensive hobby because the listeners weren't supporting the show. So if you value what we do here, like I say, $5 a month, that's less than you would spend at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, less than I spend there. Anyway, of course, I usually get a cup of coffee the size of an oil drum because I'm looking for extra caffeine. Now, before we get to Hillary, we are going to hear Hillary. This was a really brilliant performance by the former Secretary of State this morning. But one last thing on this Islamization of America, this whole Muslim Brotherhood thing. A piece from back in November in National Review by my friend Andrew McCarthy, who I mentioned earlier, I disagree with about the issue of whether or not Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, even more specifically, are Article 2 natural-born citizens. He thinks Ted Cruz is. I think he isn't. I also think that it's not going to make any difference at the end of the day because no one's going to stop Ted Cruz. But he had a piece here. This is a great piece about the controversy over Syrian refugees misses the question we should be asking. And what this piece is about is the fact that, first of all, we can't vet the people, and our government has admitted that we cannot vet the refugees, so-called, that we allow to come into the country. And we know that. I mean, can you say Tashfeen Malik? So we know that, but he says, even if we could vet these people perfectly, it wouldn't be sufficient because we look at the wrong things. We look at whether people have specific ties to terrorism. And in fact, while that might be very important, that's really not what we should be concerned about because, as we know, a lot of the problems that we've had in our country and that they've had in Europe are not from the people who come from foreign countries themselves, but actually the next generation, right? So we've seen that over and over again. Can you say Tsarnaev? I can barely say it, but you know who I mean. And the people in Minnesota, the Somalis. But if we're just vetting for only ties to terrorism or violent extremism, blah, 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 we're missing out on something really important that could be the end of our country. And what that is whether or not people have a commitment to Islamic supremacism. So whether or not they have a commitment to the idea of Sharia law. Sharia law, as Dr. Ben Carson has so accurately stated, is absolutely incompatible with the Constitution. And therefore, if we don't vet people based on whether or not they have a commitment to Sharia law, then what we're doing is just importing a lot of people who are going to help create an environment that is going to result in more terrorism and more problems in this country, which is one reason why a lot of us wonder why 98% of the so-called refugees that the UN has selected for us and our State Department has so willingly accepted are Muslim, 98% of them. We don't understand. And we know that in Muslim countries, in many of these Muslim countries, 2/3 of the people in these countries believe Sharia law should be the governing system. So if we don't check for Sharia adherence, we are just importing a lot of people hostile to the Constitution and our way of life. And that should be a big, big concern because people like that are going to have children who are going to be very hostile to our country. And this is where we've had a problem. So I will put this piece in the show notes and you guys can check it out. All right. So now back to Mrs. Clinton. And you guys know last week on the show, I think we were the first ones because we're here on Sundays. And since we're not the pretend news and we don't just talk about polls like they do on Sunday shows, we told you about Hillary and her minions cutting and pasting classified information from emails and documents that were on a secured server into documents and emails that ended up in her unsecure server. So, her problems are mounting. We heard on Friday that there were 22 emails that the State Department is not revealing, is not telling us what is in them. And there are 18 emails that we posted about this at TeriO'Brien.com between Hillary and Barack Obama that are not being revealed, that are completely redacted. And of course, that led one reporter to say, well, gee, are you telling us that in 4 years of being Secretary of State, they only exchanged 18 emails? Nobody could really answer the question there. But anyway, they're not telling us what's in those. Those are redacted. But all right, so let's leave that aside. Let's hear what Hillary has to say about that, because she was on this morning on ABC News with her former water carrier. And as I keep saying former, I don't know why I say that. I think he's still in the tank. In fact, I think that she was on that show specifically so that he could ask her some planned questions so then she can run around Iowa and say, this is asked and answered. So here's the bite we opened the program with today, asking Hillary about the claim that she keeps making, that she keeps saying none of the emails on my private server were marked classified. But he pointed out, you signed this non-disclosure agreement. What about that? It doesn't matter whether they're marked or not.
You've said many times that the emails were not marked classified. No evidence that that's not true. But the non-disclosure agreement you signed as Secretary of State says that really is not that relevant. It says classified information is marked or unmarked classified, and that all of you are trained to treat all of that sensitively and should know the difference.
George Stephanopoulos to Hillary Clinton from this morning's edition of This Week with George Stephanopoulos here on the Teri O'Brien Show. Yeah, and plus, Hillary being this most qualified, smartest person on earth. I heard Bill Clinton say earlier this week that everything Hillary touches gets better. Now, you can write your own joke. I'll just say that I guess that means nothing, no part of his body or his anatomy has ever gotten better, because I don't expect that she spent a lot of time touching it. But let's hear the answer. Let's hear the answer. Hillary, what about that non-disclosure agreement? And you're not going to believe this. Just listen.
Well, of course, and that's exactly what I did. I take classified information very seriously. You know, you can't get information off the classified system in the State Department to put onto an unclassified system, no matter what that system is. We were very specific about that. And when you receive information, of course, there has to be some marking, some indication that someone down the chain had thought that this was classified, and that was not the case.
Hillary Clinton from this morning's edition of This Week with George Stephanopoulos on ABC here on the Teri O'Brien Show. Now, wait a second. She didn't mention anything about whether stuff was marked classified or unclassified. She didn't really respond to the question. And I will tell you, he did not bust her on that at all. Wait a second. You can't get classified material from one system to the other. As we told you last week, the FBI is investigating whether Huma and Cheryl Mills and other members of Hillary's inner circle cut and pasted material from the government's classified network so it could be sent to her private email. And I will also tell you, as the New York Post is reporting today, headline, "This was all planned. Former Inspector General says Hillary, State Department are lying." Oh, they expect us to believe that? Paul Sperry writes, "The State Department is lying when it says it didn't know it was too late, until it was too late, that Hillary Clinton was improperly using personal emails and a private server to conduct official business because it never set up an agency email address for her in the first place," the department's former top watchdog says. Quote, "This was all planned in advance to skirt rules governing federal records management," said Howard Krongard, who served as the agency's inspector general from 2005 to 2008. The Harvard-educated lawyer, points out that from day one, Clinton was never assigned and never used a state gov email address like previous secretaries. And of course, they would have to know that, wouldn't they? Because they would have to create that. When you go get a new job, they give you an email, right? He says, quote, "That's a change in the standard. It tells me that this was premeditated, and this eliminates claims by the State Department they were unaware of her private email server until later," Krongard said in an exclusive interview. Quote, "How else was she supposed to do business without email?" He also points to the unusual absence of a permanent inspector general during Clinton's entire 2009 to 2013 term at the department. He said the 5.5-year vacancy was unprecedented. "This is a major gap. In fact, it's without precedent. It's the longest period any department has gone without an IG." And this was pointed out when we had Sidney Powell, the former prosecutor, on the program. She talked about this as well. And of course, it's clear that all of these moves by the Clintons were designed to circumvent the Freedom of Information Act and to make sure there was no inspector general there watching what Hillary was doing, because that's what the Clintons do. You know, to quote Joe Scarborough, a guy that I don't often agree with, but he said, you know, one reason the people think that the Clintons are hiding something is because the Clintons are always hiding something. And that's really true. I've got a couple more Hillary sound bites. Let's take the break and we'll come back. And and I'll tell you the great news for Denver Bronco fans, too. All that and more coming up here on the Teri O'Brien Show. I'll be right back.
This is Cheryl Atkinson, and you're listening to The Teri O'Brien Show.
I'm a good person. I never bothered anybody. But I can't afford a nice house in a safe neighborhood. I live in a government high-rise. Gangbangers and drug dealers walk down our halls every day. My neighbors and I were scared. We called the police, but they can't keep us safe. Some of us are too afraid to even leave our apartments. But the housing authority told me if I bought a gun to protect myself, they'd throw me to the streets. If I'm not free because of my address today, what makes you think you'll be free tomorrow? I marched behind Martin Luther King at Selma. I know my rights. Now I have my gun. I am the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Where do you want to go to lunch? I'm having a stroke. Did you hear what I said? I'm having a stroke. Why aren't you answering me? I'm having a stroke.
What's up with your face?
I'm having a stroke.
That's not normal. Is something wrong?
I'm having a stroke.
Are you having an allergic reaction?
I'm having a stroke.
When someone is having a stroke, they may not be able to say it with words, but their body language will tell you loud and clear.
I'm having a stroke.
You just need to know the sudden signs. Look for FAST, F-A-S-T. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. Or S, speech difficulty. Then T, time. Time to call 911 immediately, because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. Know the sudden signs. Face, arm, speech, time. Spot a stroke fast. Visit strokeassociation.org. Brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
So, I'm a dog, and I'm kind of new to this family, but I've noticed a trend. My humans do this thing where they go around and get all my toys and hide them in this basket, but it's always the same basket, and it's always the same place. And then they act so surprised when I find them, but I'm like, hello, that's where you put it last time. Humans are the worst at hide and go seek.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
All right, listen up, maggots, because I have something to say that you might want to hear. It's for every man 18 through 25 years old. Now, you want to live in my United States of America? Then you have got to register with Selective Service. It's a privilege, and it's the law. The fact is, you must register before you can qualify for student loans, most federal jobs, or job training. Now, you say you want to be a U.S. citizen? Well, get with the program. You've got to be registered to qualify. Now, Charlie tells me that we need to go online at sss.gov or fill out a Selective Service registration form at any post office. You did that already? Outstanding! You've earned my respect. Hoorah!
Register with Selective Service online at sss.gov or at the post office.
It's the law.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
At highway speeds, the average text takes your eyes off the road for about 5 seconds. That's enough time to travel the length of a football field. Stop texts. StopWrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Informed America Radio. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Thomas Jefferson. You're listening to Informed America Radio.
Teri's book, The ABCs of Barack Obama, Understanding God's Greatest Gift to America, is available on Amazon.com, Smashwords.com, and the iBook store. Get yours today.
She's like a fist inside a velvet glove, softly shattering left-wing stupidity. The Teri O'Brien Show, proud member of the Red State Talk Radio Network.
Red State Talk Radio.
The Talk Monster.
for more hot girl on government action? The Teri O'Brien Show.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Live in vivid red, white, and blue. Every Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time. Or on demand, anytime, at TeriO'Brien.com.
The final thing I would say, because clearly the best answer to all of this is release and disclose these materials, is that what I'm told is that this chain of email included a published newspaper report. That seems a little hard to understand, that we would be retroactively over-classifying a public newspaper article. So let's just get it out. Let's see what it is, and let the American people draw their own conclusions. This is very much like Benghazi, George. You know, the Republicans are going to continue to use it, beat up on me. I understand that. That's the way they are. But after 11 hours of testimony, answering every single question in public, which I had requested for many months, I think it's pretty clear they're grasping at straws, and this will turn out.
Oh, bitch, please.
Hillary Clinton answering questions about the 22 emails that the State Department said on Friday they won't reveal. They're completely classified. To George Stephanopoulos from this morning's This Week on ABC here on the Teri O'Brien Show. So this is just like Benghazi. Yeah, in other words, you're lying your ass off, and everybody knows it. And that's what that 11 hours of testimony proved. Everybody knows. But, of course, Hillary knows that the low information people don't really know what happened on October 22nd with respect to that testimony. And so they hear her say that, and that's it, because they need to get back to watching Entertainment Tonight, so they don't have any idea. But, and of course, I love that. Oh, the Republicans, they're just going to beat up on me. She's such a victim. Oh, my God. Because that's just the way they are. And by the way, did I mention they're men, too? And it's a war on women. So I mentioned I would share the good news for Denver Bronco fans. I've got some very good friends who are Bronco fans. And I'm looking at a website. It's a Denver Post sports blog, First and Orange, it's called. This guy named Daniel Boniface in the Denver Post, and he's writing about something called the Pooch Predictor Race. Denver Broncos win Super Bowl 50 Pooch Predictor Race. I'd never heard of this before. Good news, Denver Bronco fans. Denver will win Super Bowl 50. That's according to the results of the 2016 Super Bowl 50 Pooch Predictor Race in West Palm Beach, Florida. Do you guys know about this? The Pooch Predictor Race, held annually at the Palm Beach Kennel Club, pits one greyhound representing the AFC champs against a greyhound racing for the NFC champs. The Broncos greyhound on Saturday outraced the Carolina Panthers Pooch. Race officials say the winning dog has accurately predicted the winner of the Super Bowl 13 of 19 times. So there you have it. And there's a great photo here of the winning dog wearing a little blue and orange coat. In 2014, the Seattle Seahawks greyhound nipped the Broncos greyhound at the wire. And the Seahawks, and you Broncos fans remember this, trounced the Broncos 43-8 in the Super Bowl. The race archives from the Broncos' first two appearances in the Pooch Predictor Race were destroyed in Hurricane Francis in 2004, so we don't really know what happened there. But there's great pictures here of the greyhounds racing in their little uniforms, or just like little dog coats. Racing around. So, that could be good news. I assume the Super Bowl is next Sunday. Is that right? I think it must be, right? In the meantime, though, we have the Iowa caucuses. I know you're all going to be very excited. Be sure to go to TeriO'Brien.com, where I will be adding information. Now, one more Hillary story before we get out of here, because we're running out of time. But this is from the Daily Mail, and it's about Hillary being guarded by an Islamic terrorist when she went on her triumphal tour of Libya less than a year before U.S. personnel were murdered in Benghazi. So it just talks about another fail as Hillary went to Libya to celebrate her great success there. Because as you know, everything she touches gets better, as Bill Clinton told us. And how she was guarded by some guy with known terror ties. I'll put this in the show notes, guys. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for supporting the show, leaving comments, going to the tip jar at terryobrien.com. Always very welcome and very appreciated. Thanks so much, guys. I will be back. Well, of course, the show never ends at terryobrien.com. So be sure to go there during the week and repost our articles. But I will be back here next Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, live and anytime on demand at terryobrien.com, on Spreaker, on iTunes. And so thanks again for listening. And please remember, stay tough because only the strong can stay free.